everyone, and welcome to Word on the Street Election Edition. Well, as you all probably know, Word on the Street, the traditional edition, is normally where we focus on people and culture matters that are happening in the workplace, with the workforce, and I give you my perspective on what's going on today, tomorrow, yesterday, in the workplace. Well, for Election Edition, I bring in current elected officials and elected official hopefuls to hear about their vision for the future of their office, what they're planning to accomplish, what their hopes and dreams are, how they're going to transform the world. And we talk about it here on Word on the Street Election Edition. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Word on the Street Election Edition. Joining us today is Shannon Singleton, who is running for County Commissioner in District 2. Thanks for joining us today, Shannon.
Thank you so much.
I'm happy you're here.
Me too. It's good to see you.
All right, Shannon, so you're running for this very important office. We need to know all about you. Tell us everything. Tell us whatever it is you want us to know about who you are. Share it with us, please.
Absolutely. Well, I grew up on the East Coast with a single mom and my brothers, primarily with my one brother and a couple of half-brothers who lived in other homes, but we got to spend time together at my grandparents' house. I did both my undergraduate and graduate studies in social work. So I've been practicing social work since I was 18 years old.
Wow.
Working in shelters, originally in Philadelphia, eventually in New Mexico, where I moved and worked with women fleeing domestic violence and sexual violence and really supporting survivors in their recovery. Additionally, then I moved to California, where I worked with youth in a foster care setting and really helping support youth ensure that they could move into independence when they aged out of the system as best that we could with, frankly, way too limited resources. And then eventually I moved up to Portland with my now husband, who had a job opportunity out here. And when I got here, I took a couple of part-time jobs, working at one shelter at the front desk, and the other I was doing catering at Lewis and Clark, riding my bike out there to serve folks food.
Right.
Eventually got into a position in social services and have just continued to move up there. My husband and I recently bought a house in the St. John's community.
Okay.
Frankly, because of inheritance that came. Otherwise, that housing would have remained unaffordable for us.
Right.
So really coming from that working class space and trying to find opportunities to not only meet the basic human needs that we have, but also find ways to keep giving back to the community.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so North Portland is where you currently reside.
Right.
And what work are you doing right now?
So right now I work in the consulting business. I am primarily working on transportation projects. I'm the Director of Community Engagement and Advocacy at Espousal Strategies. And I do a lot of facilitation of advisory groups, really looking for opportunities to make sure that the community is benefiting from transportation investments.
Yeah.
So how are we getting people into the workforce pathway to these nice paying trade positions?
Absolutely.
How are we ensuring that disadvantaged business enterprises, our DBEs, are able to get contracts and opportunities for a lot of these infrastructure projects? But also how are we really addressing not only the mitigation, but how are we leaving the community better after these types of projects come through?
We know Espousal well here.
Yes.
Long time, long-term friends with Janelle and team. So,
yes.
So happy you're running.
Thank you.
So tell us about why you decided to run for District 2 now. Why now?
Yeah, so, I really wanted to run now. I had planned to run when Commissioner Jaya Paul's term ended because she would have been term limited. And the day that she decided and announced that she would be leaving her seat to run for Congress was the day I decided to run in this special election.
Oh, wow. Okay. And what was the catalyst for it?
Really, I got to a point where I understood if I needed to be the change I wanted to see. Looking at the county and it being the largest social service agency in the entire state and thinking about my work history and what I could bring to that position is really what drove me to run. So being able to come in as somebody who has provided mental health treatment to people, who has done ending homelessness work and literally helped house thousands of people, Being somebody who has worked with the healthcare industry at the state level, looking at our work around, again, youth exiting foster care, I was able to work in Governor Brown's administration to pass a bill to get rent assistance to those kids so that they'd stop aging out of care and into homelessness. So really looking at my experience and my history and what it could bring to the county is why I chose the county over running for any other type of seat.
Right, especially, I mean, the city's got like 72 openings for elected positions,
Right.
so you could have gone for one, but you said the county.
Yes.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense. So I've got a question that is specifically focused on your career history, all right? So you've worked in social services for a very long time. I mean, you just walked us through a bit of that history. You're a trained social worker, but then you also were a part of JOIN. You worked for the governor's office, the Oregon governor's office. Talk about what's missing in social services right now from your perspective, and what aren't we doing? What aren't we thinking about in response to the challenges that are happening in the social services arena?
Absolutely. I think that we have a lot of things that we know that work that we don't invest in more. One example is I started a mental health street outreach team when I worked with Cascadia Behavioral Health Care, and that team was 4 workers for the entire county. And years later now, it's still 4 workers for the entire county. So why we haven't invested more into that type of work where I can follow the person. If I'm your therapist and you go into shelter, I'm still your therapist. If you go onto the streets, I'm still your therapist. That piece is missing. Every time somebody leaves any program, they often lose their worker. So how do we reframe the system where we're following the person as opposed to the person always having to restart services every door they walk into?
Wow.
That's something that we're missing. I think we're missing a lot more peer services as well. How do we get folks who have lived experience trained to be able to provide that support and help people navigate back into housing, back into health care, and back into a space of being able to thrive? Those are some of the pieces that I see missing.
Okay.
And I think in the county in particular, there's gaps between our different entities. So if somebody is experiencing homelessness and gets arrested, they go into jail. They often leave still homeless, untreated medical conditions. They don't get transitioned to care. They might get care in jail, but suddenly they don't when they leave. So we have these gaps between the different services the county provides that I'd really like us to plug.
Okay, and so as a county commissioner, recognizing these gaps as a service provider, right? And you're watching people just kind of like be milled through a system and still be in the same position they were before they got the support from the system. How does a county commissioner respond to that from your perspective?
I think it's really in the budget is where the rubber meets the road. Budgets are moral documents, and often the program offers that come in could show linkages and coordination between these different county departments. So there's some missing there where departments are creating their budgets on their own and in coordination with the chair. As a commissioner, I think it's important to come in and say, what might be missing? How am I seeing gaps in these programs and offers? And what are opportunities to shift funds to help close those gaps?
Okay, all right. So you worked at the Joint Office.
Correct.
The Joint Office of Homeless Services.
Yes.
What position did you hold when you were at the Joint Office?
I was the interim director of the Joint Office for about 8 months.
Right on. Okay, so while you were there at the Joint Office, 8 months, which is supposed to be the department that is providing a response to the solving homelessness in Multnomah County. What did you see when in that role that is going to influence how you think about or engage in the commissioner position if you are elected into that role?
Absolutely. Great question. I think that what I see is an over-politicalization of homelessness. And I think that often the director and then subsequently the staff of the Joint Office can get stuck in this political back and forth that can happen between whether it's 2 county commissioners or somebody at the city. I think people are really tired of seeing that posturing and that pointing fingers at each other. And so as commissioner, I really find it that I have the ability to come in and really just think about this as the problem and not about the politics of it. How do we actually meet the needs of the folks who are most impacted? what is it that will help solve homelessness for individual people, right? Some people it's shelter, some people it's directly into housing, some people it's through a treatment. And right now we seem to be trying to decide which one we think is the best as electeds, and saying we should put all our money there. The reality is people aren't widgets, and we need to have all of these things so that everybody has a pathway back to housing. That piece I think has been missing for me, and really thinking about what does the research tell us, what do the experts tell us, and what does the data, the people who are experiencing homelessness tell us about what they need to end their homelessness. And again, it's not just about homelessness at the county. Once we end somebody's homelessness, we don't end their poverty. And so what are we doing in our anti-poverty work to help connect people to workforce pathways? The county invests in workforce development. How do we make those connections so that if we're paying somebody's rent, they have opportunity during that rent payment to increase their income through additional training or education? Some of those components continue to be missing when we think about our work as a larger system, again, because of how the setup can really silo these different programs.
Right. You know, I have been so laser focused on the city and county's response to what's right outside my door, right? Like tents and things of that nature, that I actually, until just right now, in this moment right now, I forgot all of the things that the county actually does, right?
Absolutely.
Like just right now, I just had this like, that's right. Like before we were in this extreme crisis, we were talking about the Department of Health. We were talking about vaccinations and the county's role in vaccinating the entire, helping put together the structure with the OHSU to do the whole state of Oregon's vaccination plans and policies. I mean, the county is the biggest, to your point, the biggest, employer of social services in the entire state of Oregon. Comprehensive social services.
Absolutely.
You just hit me with some stuff
Yes.
that made me say like, whoa, 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 expand the paradigm. Thank you for that.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you for that. Okay, so I've got a lot of questions about homelessness.
Sure.
And I've got a lot of questions about homelessness because when I put together these questions for the Word on the Street Election Edition, I don't presume I have all the best questions to ask. I talk to my neighbors, I talk to other business leaders. In particular, I talk to members of the community, and I say, if you had an opportunity to ask a commissioner a question, what question would you ask? What's pressing for you? That's literally how we build all these questions that we create for all the different candidates who are coming forward. And we've got Anna on the team who does a lot of Google searching, and they're like, ooh, think about this one too. So that's really how we put these together. And I'm gonna tell you the number one thing people are thinking about and talking about is the county's response to homelessness issues.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to spend a little bit more time there because I did ask people the questions and they gave me the questions, and now I need to ask the questions, right? And plus I already gave you the questions. So I got to stick with it. There's some more homelessness questions.
Absolutely.
All right? What are the major gaps you see in dealing with the homeless crisis, and what are the major successes you've seen in the county's response to homelessness?
Yes, so I think some really good successes have been during COVID, when we had a big influx of funds from the federal government that then flowed through the state. What I saw Multnomah County do, and at the time I was in the governor's office, so seeing this money flow from the federal government down, I watched Multnomah County come together and create a system where the experts were dealing with the navigating different funding sources, but you as a human being, if you needed rent assistance, didn't need to know what door to walk through.
Right.
And that kind of no wrong door, will figure it out on the back end and take care of the bureaucracy, was a huge success. I know that it didn't flow as quickly initially, the money, as people wanted it to, and I also know that thousands of households were prevented from falling into homelessness during the pandemic. So I thought that the county did a really good job on that and addressing that. We often forget about the prevention end.
Right.
I think the county does a really good job with the resources they have of keeping people housed, but it's again that question of how do we right-size rent assistance? I would rather pay somebody's rent for 2 years while they finish a program and increase their income so that they can achieve economic self-sufficiency than to have that same household repeatedly need prevention rent assistance. And that's where we're stuck, is people they're stuck in low income jobs and they're needing to repeat that emergency rent assistance often. That I think we can get away from. We do a lot of short-term rent assistance. How do we translate that into long-term rent assistance with some specific goals and help people be able to shift? People want to be economically self-sufficient. I don't believe in total self-sufficiency because we all need a community of support.
Absolutely.
But their economic self-sufficiency is something most folks are looking for. So I think we do a good job of prevention, but we're missing that second step.
Yeah.
I think additionally in ending homelessness work, the county has not moved as quickly as I would have liked to see them in opening additional shelter. There were buildings that we purchased while I was at the joint office that weren't opened, or I'm not sure, I have to actually look, hadn't been opened at least as a couple months ago.
Okay.
So when we purchase a building or we plan to do shelter, how do we get that moving more quickly and ensure that we have service providers on board to staff that shelter? Folks shouldn't have to wait so long to find that safety. So those are some of the places where I see both some successes and some gaps.
Absolutely. You made a point about rent assistance, and quite frankly, this has been the most educational interview that I've had because you are a practitioner.
Right.
And so some of the things that you're highlighting, I'm like, never thought about that. How accessible is the rent assistance program? Like, is it something that a lot of people know about? Is it something that's heavily utilized? Is it something that needs to be promoted better or differently? Are there requirements connected to the program? Can you just give us a little bit of texture about like what we're talking about homelessness, but you just talked about a resource like rent assistance that helps to keep people in their homes and prevents them from becoming homeless. But I have no idea how that process even generically works. Any kind of, you did not expect this question, but now I'm just like, how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's still overly complicated. It can work really differently depending on the agency, depending on what funding source that agency gets for their rent assistance. So some people, it's a set dollar amount every month, and you call and you try to get in the queue to get rent assistance that month, and once they hit that dollar amount, that's it.
Okay.
For others, rent assistance can include our long-term rent assistance or our permanent supportive housing, and so that can look like you complete an assessment, and we really look at who is the most vulnerable on these different measures like behavioral health, physical health. Often we have people with really complicated physical health conditions and mental health and or addiction conditions, plus long-term homelessness. These are the folks who might need that longer-term or permanent support, and that process looks completely different. So I think part of the challenge is that it is been a patchwork because everything was run separately.
Yeah.
The city funded adults, the county funded youth and families, and then there's lots of people who do faith-based, who might do donations primarily that they're running, and they can offer rent assistance. So part of, I think, the work is how do we streamline this in a way that, again, makes it easier for the human being that we're meant to serve, and anybody who needs support knows how to get it. I think that was really a big catalyst for us in moving forward. The supportive housing services measure was we don't often have enough to do the plus services part. And so how are we wrapping services and supports around people once they're housed so they can maintain their housing and get out of that cycle as well?
It's really interesting. When I worked at the state, at the Oregon Department of Education, Governor Kitzhaber had just recently established the HEC, the Higher Education Coordination Committee.
I think committee.
Councilors.
Might be council.
HECC. But it was like, how do we make sure that we've got this kind of central organizing, coordinating entity for the state of Oregon to make sure people don't fall through the cracks, to make sure that the money is making sense, where it's going, how it's going, who we're serving, et cetera. Does that kind of coordination exist in the county when it comes to all of the different social services, organizations, and nonprofits who are all kind of focused on helping to be responsive to the homelessness crisis, receiving county funds, but doing it completely different than the other entity out there? Does that exist?
It does and it doesn't. So here's what the challenge is that homelessness is a condition, right? And so people might be connected with the county through their health services, their primary care, but they may also have a housing problem. it doesn't necessarily mean that that county clinic has access to the rent assistance or supports for that person.
Gotcha.
And so they may not be connected in the same way. That person may have to go through other doors to get rent assistance. Similarly, like we talked about earlier with the jails, if somebody's in jail, it doesn't necessarily mean that anybody on the outside knows. If I might have been working with that person to move into housing, and I won't know that they're in jail. So we have some of those pieces that are still missing, but for the joint office funded programs, that's something that I'm hoping they're moving towards, is getting back that coordination where the providers are meeting together and having conversations about what's working and what isn't. And then we have County Human Services, which is a completely separate department that's working on the anti-poverty programs.
Okay.
And so there's different systems that are a bit of a patchwork depending on how you enter. And you might have a housing instability or homelessness as part of your story. There isn't something that coordinates all of that. That's part of what I see the role of the commission, is how are we taking that higher level view and looking at all of these different systems and departments that we operate and finding ways to make it easier for the people we serve to meet their basic human needs.
And so having the inside knowledge of the way in which many of these social services departments run and how they sync up with the nonprofits and the state and the city, it's helpful.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right. I'm tracking. I'm picking up what you're putting down. Okay. So you've already answered this question. That's kind of the roadmap. I see what your roadmap is. I love the I keep saying the texture, right? Like there's this blank canvas, but I can see the dimensions of what you're painting on top of the canvas. I want to ask you, do you see yourself as being more in tune with the homelessness issue than your opponents, given your background at the Joint Homeless Office, specifically working in the Joint Office?
Yeah, I think that really, I think the big difference for me is that direct service experience.
Okay.
Having been on the ground doing the work is where I see that biggest difference. I understand what our policy and budget decisions mean for the human beings on the ground, both the workers and the person experiencing homelessness. I think my time at the Joint Office helped me see and understand county dynamics in a way that I didn't as just a provider. Knowing how some of those machinations work, knowing where those partnerships exist or need to be strengthened between departments, that was learning for me at the Joint Office that I think will serve me really well.
Okay, makes sense. How do you see your work in social services, as a social worker, at the Joint Office, at the state? How do you see that influencing your vision for the future of Multnomah County?
I think that at the core of being a social worker is holding on to hope. We have clients who we used to say, no, but they can't fire us. We don't ever give up, right? It's always opportunity for change, for something to be different for that person. And so holding on to that hope is something that I think really is central to my vision around being a commissioner. The other piece I would say on that is we center the people most impacted. So for me, it's hearing from the frontline workers, it's hearing from, and I mean the social workers doing the work on the ground, not even just the county workers, absolutely hearing from the county workers, but what's happening on the ground for folks who are doing street outreach. What are the things that they're seeing and hearing? What are the trends? It can tell us so much about what types of supports people need. Again, what do people who are experiencing homelessness tell us that they need? There's been some great surveys done and interviews with folks talking about how they can end their homelessness. We should be listening to those things and use that to help drive policy and budget investments. So I think it's a different approach to how a lot of government operates, where I know that I have expertise, but not in everything that the county does, and I will very much be talking to and listening to the people who are on the front lines of that work to tell me what they need the most.
How will you get access to the people who are on the front lines? I mean, once you're in these elected positions, and I've worked for many electeds, you are so caught up in the politics and the bureaucracy and the jousting that it makes it really hard to reconnect with the community. I mean, when you're running, you're out there door to door, connecting with folks. But when you're in those roles, you are busy.
Yeah.
It's busy. It's really busy, and you're being tugged in a lot of different directions by stakeholders who need something from you, need a decision from you, need your advocacy on the ground, from your ivory tower, how are you going to continue to connect with the people, to hear from the people about what they need?
I think my advantage there is that's my people now. So this is my community. This is where I spend time, and so I'm always hearing from folks who are doing this work on the day-to-day. In addition to being connected to folks who do research and have these conversations as a part of research projects with folks who are experiencing homelessness or living in shelters, and understanding the different shelter models and what works well or what works best. So that's a piece of it. I think the other is, frankly, I'm going to have to do some work to really make sure that I'm prioritizing space for people. A lot of folks will want time and attention, but who I choose to give that to says a lot about my values and how I'm going to be a leader. I think to date in my career, I've been able to hold on to that, and that would be my goal as a county commissioner, is to continue to prioritize the folks who I think can give me the best information to make an informed decision. Because I'm also not going to sit around and process stuff forever. We need to get some things done. So I want to hear from folks. I want to hear from them early, and I want to, so that I can make really informed decisions as a county commissioner.
I think you said your budget is a moral document. Where elected officials spend their time is also a moral statement.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
It really is.
Yep.
Okay. I've only got a couple more questions for you. All right? You're very vocal about a ground-up solution to criminal justice, wanting to connect people with social services they need, and recognizing that a lack of these services can lead to criminal behavior and indictment. What services are you hoping to implement or expand in order to achieve this goal?
Yeah, I think when I think about safe communities, they're healthy communities, right? And so a lot of it has to do with, again, these broader programs that the county operates. How are we getting folks into healthcare, including primary physical health care, but mental health care? What are we doing to expand the workforce around mental health care to ensure that people can have culturally specific or culturally relevant services at a minimum? How are we thinking about that pathway for workforce and getting people into those roles? What does it mean, again, for peers to be a part of addictions treatment? How are we addressing workforce needs in communities that continue to be oppressed and marginalized and kept out of these living wage jobs? Those are some of the things that I think are more those upstream approaches. And then again, looking at, we have a lot of amazing folks in the community doing violence prevention work that are from community, that are embedded in community, and that are really about community. And I hear regularly from them how underfunded they are. And so what are opportunities, again, to look at the state as well as our local resources to really get additional funding into those sorts of programs that are doing that prevention work. But we have to start with those, again, those basic human needs: health, shelter, food, clothing, water, all these things that folks continue to lack access to or have to make choices about affording. I grew up in a home where we had to choose to pay the light bill or the mortgage, or we had to choose which thing we were going to have turned off. And you can lose electricity, but you can't lose water. Right? And so how do we stop having that be the decision making for so many of our families? And particularly in Multnomah County, our Black families' income levels continue to be woefully behind other communities.
Right on. Okay. So my final question for you is, why should people vote for you for this role? Why you? Why now?
Yeah, I think people should vote for me for this role because I am the only person who is running who has this experience, both personal experience as well as professional experience, to operate the services that the county actually funds. I think that I've had time in the governor's office to understand budgets. I got to craft a budget at the Joint Office of Homeless Services. So I've had opportunities to learn really all the different dynamics of what goes into the operations of what the county does. And frankly, like other folks, I am frustrated, and I think that we need to be moving quickly. I think that we need to get some things done because our community cannot continue to suffer. So I think I'm the best person for that job because I can do that from day one. Right
on. Well, thank you so much, Shannon, for coming and spending some time with us. It has
Absolutely.
been my pleasure to meet you.
You too.
And thank you all for tuning in for Word on the Street Election Edition. If you want to jump into the chat, you got something to add to the conversation, please do. We'll get back to you as per always. Until next time.